The government created the ghetto and low-income neighborhoods, not by rivers or rails, but by invisible lines. Lines drawn on maps, separating neighborhoods, dictating destinies. These lines were not just arbitrary. They were meticulously planned to segregate communities based on race and economic status. This wasn't some dystopian fantasy. This was the reality of redlining in America. A practice sanctioned by the government and financial institutions, it systematically marginalized entire communities. This insidious practice, fueled by racism and greed, left an indelible mark on our urban landscapes, creating the ghettos we see today. Neighborhoods were starved of investment, leading to a cycle of poverty and decay. Redlining wasn't just about where people could live, it was about limiting opportunity, stifling dreams. It was about creating barriers to economic mobility and ensuring that certain communities remained disadvantaged. It was about denying Black families the chance to build wealth and security through homeownership, a cornerstone of the American dream. Homeownership is often the primary means of building generational wealth, and redlining effectively cut off this path for many. The consequences of this deliberate segregation continue to reverberate through generations. The lack of investment in these communities has led to a persistent wealth gap and limited access to quality education and healthcare. As well as persistent high rates of crime, we discuss the poverty cycle in our other video. We're talking about dilapidated housing, underfunded schools, limited job prospects. These are not just statistics. They are the lived realities of millions of people who have been systematically denied the opportunities afforded to others. These regions were so underfunded that even the tap water wasn't always the safest, like in Flint, Michigan, which reverberates to modern days. This is the toxic legacy of redlining, a shameful chapter in American history that we must confront and dismantle. Understanding this history is crucial for addressing the inequalities that persist today. Only by acknowledging and rectifying these past injustices can we hope to build a more equitable future for all. Redlining, a term coined in the 1960s, describes a discriminatory practice that began decades earlier. This practice had profound and lasting impacts on the urban landscape and the lives of countless individuals. It involved literally drawing red lines on maps around neighborhoods deemed hazardous for investment. These maps were used by banks and other financial institutions to determine where they would and would not invest. These hazardous areas were, almost always, predominantly Black neighborhoods with brown and low-income white people. The residents of these areas were unfairly labeled as high risk, but because of their financial status and their race. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a calculated strategy. Government officials and urban planners deliberately designed these policies to segregate communities and limit the economic mobility of people of color and low-income white families. Interestingly, one of rock and roll's most famous legends grew up alongside other Black families in his redline neighborhood, which helped inspire his own music, which we will reveal at the end. Like and subscribe right now. The Federal Housing Administration, established in 1934, played a key role in this system. The FHA's policies were instrumental in shaping the housing market and determining who had access to home ownership. The FHA was supposed to make home ownership accessible. Instead, it fueled segregation. By refusing to insure mortgages in redlined areas, the FHA ensured that these neighborhoods would remain underdeveloped and marginalized, causing issues for generations. The FHA refused to insure mortgages in redlined areas, effectively starving these communities of investment. This lack of investment led to a cycle of decline, as homes and infrastructure deteriorated without the necessary funds for maintenance and improvement. Private lenders followed suit, denying loans to people of color even if they could afford them. This widespread discrimination in lending practices further entrenched the economic disparities between whites and people of color, all because of the address they lived in and the color of their skin. This created a self-fulfilling prophecy. trapping mostly black families in neighborhoods starved of resources and opportunity for generations. Even famous figures like Elvis Presley were affected by redlining. Due to the discriminatory policies, low-income whites, including Elvis, were forced to live in redlined neighborhoods. This not only shaped their lives, but also influenced their music and culture. Redlining did not exclusively impact people of color. It cast a wide net of economic disenfranchisement. Low-income white families often found themselves in the same redlined areas, grappling with the same challenges of limited access to quality housing, education, and economic opportunities. Although white people still had better chances at landing a good job that would have helped them move out sooner, these shared hardships created unique cultural intersections. Elvis Presley, born into a poor white family in Mississippi, experienced the effects of redlining firsthand. His family lived in a predominantly black neighborhood in Memphis, Tennessee. This environment, shaped by the systemic neglect and disinvestment typical of redlined areas, had a profound impact on his musical style. Surrounded by the vibrant sounds of blues, gospel, and rhythm and blues, Elvis absorbed these influences, blending them into his groundbreaking rock and roll music. The cultural melting pot of redlined neighborhoods became a crucible for creativity, giving rise to new forms of artistic expression, blending different forms to create new forms. Despite the oppressive conditions, or perhaps because of them, these communities produced some of the most enduring and influential music and art of the 20th century. The adversity faced by residents fostered a sense of resilience and innovation as they turned to music, art, and community as means of survival and resistance. However, it's crucial to recognize that while low-income whites like Elvis faced significant hardships, the systemic racism embedded in redlining policies ensured that black communities bore the brunt of the discrimination. The intersectionality of poverty and racial discrimination created layers of inequality, with black families consistently pushed to the margins. We discuss intersectionality in our other video you should check out. Understanding the broader impact of redlining helps us grasp the full scope of its legacy. It wasn't just a tool of racial segregation. It was a mechanism of economic control that stifled potential and innovation across multiple communities, which was especially exacerbated as Nixon's law and order campaign strengthened its grip on these communities through more police force. The echoes of redlining's reach can still be heard in the music, culture, and ongoing struggles for justice and equality today. While black communities were the primary victims of redlining, they weren't the only ones targeted. Other minority groups, including Latinos, Native Americans, and Asian Americans, also faced discriminatory lending practices and housing discrimination. These communities were often relegated to the least desirable areas, subject to environmental hazards, inadequate infrastructure, and limited access to resources. Redlining, in essence, created a hierarchy of undesirability, with black communities often at the very bottom. This wasn't just about housing, it was about limiting opportunities for entire communities, denying them the chance to thrive. Redlining was a weapon of economic and social control, designed to keep marginalized communities down. Like and subscribe right now for more videos on psychology, race, politics, and more.